My name is Joseph. This is Advanced Tactics, and on this episode of Pass or Play, we are going to the land of the Nordic Vikings and Dragons in Bethesda's most recent addition to the Elder Scroll franchise, Skyrim. Now, as there is a lot of things to cover, so let's start with the biggest issues of this review, the mechanics. Now, straight out of the gate, we have to cover stamina. This is a mechanic that I'm okay with for running or jumping if it were even really required, but for special attacks with weapons, this should have been abandoned. It is archaic and no longer needed and serves only as an arbitrary limitation early game and ignored in the later levels. Honestly, in a game where your only real options for combat are click and hold down click, options in combat should have been bigger concern than binary weak and strong attacks. Now the skill tree, which for the most part I like, felt a bit incomplete at worst and useless at best for many reasons. The main downfall here being it is these skills that judge your level. This results in your character level bloating far beyond what they should be with the non-combat related skills like blacksmithing and alchemy that your 20 points in two-handed weapons just can't deal with. Furthermore, the focus on the skill-related trees results in some strange perks being in arbitrary trees. It would have served the game much better to have at least one general skill tree so we wouldn't have carry 100 more pounds in the pickpocket tree and allow for more globally helpful perks. Now, speaking of weight, let's segue into how weight, which is a far more interesting mechanic, becomes a hindrance in this game versus the Fallout series where it was easily accepted. The reason for this is rather simple. In the Fallout series, weapons and armor could be used to repair others of that same make and model. However, in Skyrim, it does not have this feature, thus you quickly fill your bags with the same items over and over as the mobs tend to match your gear. You'll quickly find yourself leaving almost everything on the ground, which really stands at odds with the kleptomaniac attitude that usually is required for this kind of RPG. Now also, as dragons become more and more prominent, the extremely heavy and valuable dragon bones and scales actually become another hindrance, so you have to have a pack mule, and by that I mean a companion, becomes essential to your gameplay. Weapons in this, which are a huge part of the game, look very nice and can be enchanted with charges of fire, ice, or even to steal the soul of your victims. The weapons, though, are all the standard fantasy regiment and have nothing that you would write home about as new or unique. However, I notice as you start to get to the higher levels, the shield will become king. It seems that the adjustment of the shield mechanics is definitely needed. Magic, which has a strong start, dies off very quickly and feels like it just doesn't have the power needed to allow you to be a solid caster, which is a sad thing because I really like the idea of being a pure caster. This only applies to you, however, because due to the quirks of the design, the first spells you gain are the most mana efficient and damage spells, which new spells only serve to give you more utility. Using your flamethrower or fireball will generally deal the same damage over time, and while your spells have a damage cap, enemy casters' damage scales with their level, so it is very possible to be one-shotted by a caster later in the game that can take several of your own spells. Now, of course, this can be countered with a shield, which will eventually get a perk that reduces the damage in half. Now, mounts and houses are not really something I'm going to talk about, though I will point out that my horse single-handedly tanked a dragon, but then proceeded to die later on to a wolf. But after a reload and some time, my horse then died again by dropping off a ledge that was apparently just slightly too high for him. I realized they were trying to add a real-life gravity system and damage structure. However, if Mr. Ed can tank a dragon and stand in its fire, I really don't think jumping from a rock that's just slightly above its head is going to kill him. But I'm not a veterinarian, so don't quote me on that. Now, status effects really need to have a way to be depicted better, because more than anything else, the only way I knew something was up was being told by towns members that I looked sickly or needed to lie down. After 3 hours of having this happen, I just happened to be looking at my map, which also had my journal, so I could choose my quests to go complete, and I found something that told me I had a disease, which after leaving the first town only took me about 2 seconds to get rid of once I found the temple. So I get the whole minimalistic UI, but you're supposed to still convey to a player what's going on. It was an issue with a number of other prompts as well. Like early in the game, you could get reduced to a low life, and suddenly a text box would pop up and stop the act. Now you're in the middle of doing something, so more or less you ignore it, and the same will happen with your stamina when it drops low, and your mana, and your sneaking, and a dozen other annoying pop-ups before you just ignore them and click them away. Now finally, the inventory system, which is also kind of a mess because it sort of leaves much to be desired. However, it's not the worst I've seen in any game, so I'm going to just gloss over it. Now, one of the mechanics I really like and I hope that they put more time into is the favorites feature. Now, it was still a bit clunky, and it was actually far from perfect, because it still confused if you had two of the same weapon, but being able to switch to your bow, and then to your two weapons, and then to a sword and a shield, having that favoriting ability was still very useful. Now, as for the plot, your character is found sitting in a cart and is forced to listen to some convicts who whine about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and how the guy in the back with a gag in his mouth is a threat because he has the voice. However, like most Bethesda games, the moment they force you through the starter plot, it fades into the background, as nothing more than something you hit upon once in a great while. You'll have plenty to go through, though, thanks to a massive amount of side quests and even some randomly generated quests. The narrative really only exists to motivate the player to go around and experience the settings. Now, graphics-wise, nothing special. I ran at the best settings and honestly was not impressed by its engine, though I noticed some of the fun Bethesda glitches in NPCs and mobs, though these are nothing new if you played any of the Fallout series. Music in the game is superbly done. It's very catchy, and honestly, you'll get into more fights just to listen to more of the battle music. So it is refreshing to hear the music both in the towns and in the forests and plains, and it gets you pumped and just has a great overall feeling. In conclusion, this game is a pass for me. While I feel it has some great moments, I could have easily found them in other games. Now, before you try to lynch me in the comments, a friend of mine who enjoys modding games is also going to do a review on Skyrim from his different standpoint. So if you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe and tell your friends, because without viewers, it's just me talking to myself.